Everybody, thanks for tuning in to Peeling Back the Label with Book and Wine Lovers. Today we have a very special guest, Joan Koster, who is an award-winning author, and the books that we'll be chatting about today is That Dickinson Girl and Censored Angel, and they're both phenomenal books about badass women. I'll just say it that way. Back in the day, these women just overcame so much. They risked their lives for what they believed in. And we're going to hear all about that from Joan. So I'm going to put her through now. So Joan, just ask if you could join. So while Joan is logging in, I will say that I've done 2 book tours for her, both with That Dickinson Girl and Censored Angel. The latest one was That Dickinson Girl with the audiobook. Everybody loved the narrator. They loved the book. Once they read that one, they can't wait to read the next one. They loved all the really strong protagonists. Okay, she sent me a request. So anyway, so while we're waiting for Joan to come in, so, really wrong protagonist women, especially like with That Dickinson Girl, she was compared a lot to, they always called her Joan of Arc. Now, you know who that is. And she is just a massive, massive, badass woman. So that's what we're going to hear about, and how Joan came across these lovely women and why she decided to write about them. Sometimes the internet gods are not on our side, and they're playing a little havoc with us. They like to have fun, making it a little bit harder for us to get hooked up. Thank you for your patience, everyone. I apologize, but that's just real life. Sometimes you have to wait a minute. Ooh!
I'm here.
Hi, John.
Hi.
We did it. We did it. Well, I don't know if you have anything with you, but I'm drinking champagne. I don't know what you're drinking, but I'll do cheers to that.
I have tea.
Okay. Well, I have to, continue my reputation.
Of course.
It's 5:00 somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I was just kind of like telling everybody what, fabulous protagonist women that you portrayed in those books, and how badass they are, and how they risked their lives for what they believed in. So we're going to talk about those books today. Do you happen to have the books at all?
Yep, I have them.
Ooh,
That's one.
okay. That's That Dickinson Girl.
Right?
Okay.
And the other
Beautiful.
book is Censored Angel.
Beautiful. Now, do you have a third book coming out?
I do. The third book will be called Prairie Cinderella,
Oh,
and it's about Vinnie Ream, and that's actually what she was called. She grew up became the first woman to be given a sculpture commission by the United States government.
wow. That's going to be a good one.
Yep, and everybody knows her sculpture. They just don't know her. Her sculpture sits in the rotunda.
Wow. Okay, now when do you think that'll be coming out?
Um, I'm hoping for the fall.
Very nice.
I
That'll
have,
be perfect timing for the holidays. Good
yeah,
Christmas presents.
that's my
Or
idea.
Hanukkah.
I think it'll be a very popular book because it's about art and artists, but it also, because she was a frontierswoman, her longtime love was a Cherokee Indian. But he was also the first Indian to take a case before the Supreme Court. He was a lawyer.
Wow. Oh, so this is going to be a nice, juicy book. A lot of different themes going on and
Yeah.
different storylines. So it's going to be a nice one. Now, what made you decide to write about this particular woman?
Well, when I select my women, the first thing I look for is someone who hasn't had a novel written about them. I personally believe that if you're going to really learn about a person, the best way is through a novel. Now, each of these women have biographies about them, but biographies are actually so full of facts and details, and there's a new style in biography of grouping things by themes, so it's not chronological. And so I think you lose a lot about the person's life. You don't see them grow. And each of my books start with the girls in their teenage years, so they're coming of age stories. And I'm trying to show why they ended up doing the really kind of amazing things that they did and very brave things. Both of the women I wrote about, and Vinnie Ream also. I mean, if you think about this girl who grew up on the frontier and ends up presenting in the halls of Congress, and goes to Italy and gets her sculpture made, huge sculpture made of marble and so on. She really did something really incredible for the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing, these women, what they accomplished. I mean, way more than you or I did. You know what I mean? I mean, they risked their lives and,
Yes, they did.
for that. Maybe we could start talking about that Dickinson girl
Okay,
first.
we'll start
So this
with
way
on it.
yeah.
Okay, and
And we can,
the reason I selected is a funny story is because I wrote my very first novel, which is not published. You don't usually publish your first novel. And someone asked me, who's the real person in your novel? Because I had made fictional characters. And I said, oh, I have Anna Dickinson. I had discovered her because I had already picked a character and picked a street in Philadelphia where she lived and discovered that Anna Dickinson lived on the next block over. I thought, well, they had to be friends, right?
yeah, that's so
So,
funny.
so that's how I picked her. And then when I was pitching the first book, someone said, well, why don't you write about Anna Dickinson? I never heard of her. And I said, well, you should have, because she was the most popular woman in the United States during the American Civil War. And her picture was everywhere. Her speeches were written up in the newspapers. She traveled all over, and her fame lasted all through the 1870s and 80s, and so on. So Anna Dickinson, this is actually her photograph on the cover. That's her picture. Was a
Beautiful.
little different for her time because we all think of long hair with the center part and so on. She had short curly hair. So right there you can tell she was a little bit of a rebel. And she was a really good speaker. And what happened is she was at an abolitionist meeting and she stood up and 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 gave her speech, and she was 16 at the time.
Amazing.
And nobody could believe that this young girl of 16, not only could she project her, you have to remember, there's no microphones in the Civil War period, could project her voice. And so she was asked by the abolitionists to tour um, all across the North, speaking for the Civil War and for abolition. And she took on her own personal cause. She wanted that Black men could serve in the Union Army. That was her own personal cause. And so here she's 16 and she's traveling all over the country. And she had a companion, although nothing's been written about her companion. So I made up a companion for her. I chose a mill worker because that was the exact opposite of Anna, because Anna was well educated, not rich. She didn't come from a rich family. Her mother was a widow and tutored to earn money, but she was highly educated, and she grew up on Arch Street in Philadelphia, where all the famous people lived. Lucretia Mott lived there. Um, Robert Purvis, who was the richest black man in Philadelphia, lived there. So she had a network of very powerful people behind her, and they encouraged her to go off and do this. So otherwise, other than the fictional companion, almost everything else in this book is real. And it follows the correct timeline and all of the events that led up to her being the first woman to address Congress. And not only was she the first woman to give a political address to Congress, and Lincoln was there, and Mary Todd Lincoln was there, she charged them. She made them pay, and then she donated the fee to the Freedmen's Society. So she was a Quaker, and she really believed in her cause. Now, she faced a lot of opposition. We always think of the North as being a kind of unified thing, but actually it was very divided about the war. And they were Copperheads, and they were Democrats at the time, Copperheads, who opposed the war. So when she gave her speeches, people would come and they would boo and they would throw things at her. They would yell fire and get the gas lights off so the people would be frightened. And then when she went to, she did she was hired by the Republican Party, first woman hired to give political speeches by the Republican Party. She went to places the men wouldn't go. And so one place, Shamokin, Pennsylvania, they attacked her. They cut her hair. Yeah. And that's all true. That all happened. And the reason I know all this is also interesting, is all her papers are in the Library of Congress. She kept photo albums, beautiful photo albums. The pictures are pinned with straight pins to there's black pages. Wow. And if you go to the Library of Congress, they actually let you handle them and turn the pages and look at these. Isn't that nice? It's incredible. And then all her letters are there, and also all the things that she wrote, her speeches. She wrote 5 plays, which she had several performed. One, in fact, was a story of a girl kind of like her who turned into an actress. And so she did very well. She earned millions of dollars because, like, when she gave a speech and 1,000 people came, they'd pay 50 cents a piece. And so she ended up with lots of money. And then she invested it in Chicago, and then it all burnt down. So she had to keep working. And she was the sole support of her entire family. Everybody relied on her to support them. So she went around and did the lecture circuit. So she traveled all over the country giving lectures. Mark Twain said she was the best orator he ever heard. Wow. Now that's a nice compliment. That is. And so she rode the train when the 2 tracks met together. She was on the train with the golden spike. And then she went out to California. And when she got there, they were holding Chinese immigrants on a boat. They wouldn't let them get off the boat. And she told the people there, I won't speak until you let those people off the boat. And they did. They let them off the boat. That's how powerful she was. They let them off the boat, and then she gave her speech, and then the Chinese community gave her a big feast and thanked her for what she had done, which she was very socially minded in terms of that. Absolutely. So she went around, she did the lecture tour, and then what happened, the lecture tour died once vaudeville came in. Well, she wasn't going to do vaudeville. And she still needed money to support her family. So she decided, she looked around for a job. And the only one that paid the same for women and men was actress. But she was a Quaker, you have to understand. And so this was considered outrageous. She was going to be an actress. Well, she wrote these plays. Nobody would put them on until she said, oh, I'll put them on. And she took the lead role. And the first play was about Anne Boleyn because she thought thought she had gotten a raw deal by all the men who had written about her. And so she put this on in Connecticut, and Mark Twain was there, and Harry Beecher Stowe was there, all the big names, and they loved it. She got great reviews. But then it went to New York, and they said she's not a trained actress, she's not trained, and they panned her. And that was really sad. So she wrote some other plays, as I said, and then she did Hamlet. She decided she was going to play Hamlet. Can you imagine? In tights, Quaker, with women who wore long dresses.
Right.
Okay, so
Right. Yes.
So there was photographs of her in the tights, and she went on to put on Hamlet. She did it all. She toured. She spoke all over New York State. It's quite amazing what she actually did in her life, because she just traveled everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a time when it was comfortable to travel. And so she put on the Hamlet, and she took it to Broadway. She put it on Broadway, and she was panned again. They said that she didn't, she didn't know how to act. Well, 10 years later, they started performing Ibsen, and she had actually started acting she wasn't melodramatic. Before that, actresses had to be melodramatic. Well, she didn't do that. She studied the character. She tried to be natural as Hamlet, and that's why she got panned. But she's now considered the mother of modern theater in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And then, of course, I should mention that she was an athlete. She climbed Mount Washington 23 times.
Wow.
And she also climbed the Rockies. She was probably the second woman to climb Pikes Peak, and she climbed several other of the Rockies. And there's a mountain in the Rockies named after her. Mount Dickinson is named after Anna Dickinson. So that's a hard mountain to climb, that one.
Well, and even back then, you didn't have the tools that you
No.
have now. I mean, it's hard now, let alone back then, and they didn't have the tools that we have now.
No, they didn't have anything. She had a donkey and a blanket roll, you know. So anyway, so she lived a really interesting life. I only tell the story up to the address to Congress, and I have an assassin who's after her, because at that time, I mean, that was going on. But I didn't finish her story in this book. I might write it someday, because the second half of her life was really interesting too.
Oh, so we might have another book on. Okay, that's nice.
Or I might just do that as extras for people who are looking for extras. On my website, I do have an alternative first chapter to this book. When I wrote the book, I had this first chapter, and then nobody believed it was true, because I actually, it's a true story. It was written up in the newspapers, and she wrote it as well, so I know what happened. When she was 16, she went to a debate on women's rights, and she got so angry at the speaker that she stomped up on the stage, and she yelled him down, and she said, he said something like, women can't be lawyers, and women can't be doctors, and women, and then she got up there and said, yes, this, here's a women lawyer, because there were women lawyers, and there were women doctors at the time even, and she named them and so on, and she drove him out of the auditorium.
Good for her.
And that was at 16, and I wrote that up as a chapter, and everybody who read it said, this can't be true. She couldn't have done that. Because, physically, he drove him out of the door, but she did. I mean, that's what all of the writing says, and I try to use only firsthand documents. So anyway.
She had that presence where people were, they listened to her. And they were afraid of her, in terms, obviously he became afraid of her, because he's like, okay, I'm out of here. So she really had a really big presence. And not everyone can do that too,
But she must, I always try to imagine, because she was 5 foot. She was diminutive. She had this curly hair. She must have really stood out in some way. I think her voice must have just been incredible.
Yeah, because she was tiny,
Yeah,
a little ball of fire.
exactly. And that's what they said. I mean, she was just very energetic. The only thing is, and this is true, before every speech, she got sick to her stomach.
Yeah, her
So
nerves, I guess.
she
And
still
she,
had,
I remember one part in the story, towards the end of the book, like you said with the assassin. I mean, uh, she went even though
yeah,
she could get killed. She no, I signed up. I'm doing it, and we're gonna, I'm doing it.
yeah,
So
nothing
and that
stopped
shows a
her.
lot of guts, a lot of guts.
She had, this is another story, true story. She had given a speech in Albany and she was scheduled to give a speech in New York City. And at the time, there were steamboats that ran from Albany to New York City. However, it was so cold that the Hudson River froze. And the steamboat could only get to Poughkeepsie. And the train was on the other side from the dock from the steamboat. So she hired a carter to take her across the frozen Hudson to the other side to get the train. Now she got across, but the people who tried it behind her went in. Yeah,
Uh-oh.
but she got on the train. She got down to New York City. She got there just in time. Gets into the theater where she's speaking, and she gives her speech. She does the whole thing. And next day in the newspaper, they wrote up that she looked all disheveled and her hair needed to be combed. And she just said, "I got there."
Right. You don't know what I had to go through just to get there.
Yeah. So yes. So I have a lot of fun writing about her. Now, a lot of people have said she comes across as very arrogant and aggressive. But my point is, I don't think a woman could have done the things she did at that time and stood up to the men that she stood up to if you weren't arrogant and aggressive. And she got more arrogant and aggressive as time
Mhm.
went on, as she got more fame and more money too. She
Right.
was
She,
at
she
one
had no
point,
choice but to be arrogant. She
yeah,
had no choice, or else she wouldn't be who she is, who she is
right.
today.
And
I
I and
agree.
I felt that in her letters. I mean, when I read her letters, I felt this is a person who really has a lot of self-confidence.
Was there
So
anything that you found in your research that you found very interesting, but you just didn't, have the chance to put in your book or anything while you were doing all this research, or just anything that stood out that you found pretty, amazing?
Well, I think the really interesting thing in my book is her relationship with Susan B. Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
Susan B. Anthony was 20 years older than her, and she was her idol. She had looked up to her from the time she was a child. And when she finally met her, Susan B. Anthony was quite taken with Anna,
Mm-hmm.
and they started a relationship. And of course, everybody says, well, there's no proof, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think what happened is in Susan Anthony's letters, they took out Anna Dickinson was written out of the women's history. That's one of the reasons she's been forgotten. And I think they took out the letters between Anna and Susan. However, nobody ever went to check Anna Dickinson's papers. And there's Susan B. Anthony's love letters. They're there. So anyone who wants to go check, go to see the Anna Dickinson collection. You'll find letters from Susan B. Anthony. And
You know
Susan B.
what?
Anthony,
Sometimes times never change because they might do that. They might have done that even today, like with a very prominent figure, like
yeah,
say, for example, Susan B. Anthony. Like, hush, hush, no one needs to know.
exactly. Anyway, so Susan B. Anthony called her Chicky Dicky, which I thought was kind of
Hmm.
cute. Um, but they split. I don't know if you know the history of this, but Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were furious about the 14th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to black men, because they thought women should get it first. And so they actually went out and campaigned against the 14th Amendment. Anna Dickinson thought this was horrible. And so she and other women split, and the women's movement split over this issue, because Anna Dickinson did believe in uh, that anybody who could get the right to vote should get the right to vote.
Right.
Um, so Anyway, so that was one interesting thing. The other thing that I have in here um, is about John Greenleaf Whittier. I don't know if you remember him.
Mm.
We used to read his poems he's a poet. We used
Okay.
to read his poems in elementary school. He wrote about harvests and pumpkins and, very nice kind of things like that. But her mother told her to go see him and was quite adamant about it. I've read the letters. She does tell him to go see him. And Anna went to see him. She actually had a relationship with him. Um, he was, let's see, he was probably 30 years older than her, somewhere there on there. He was also a Quaker. And I went to visit his house. His house is in Massachusetts. And I walk in the door, and over the stairs is a portrait of him. And it looks just like Anna Dickinson.
Hmm.
So I'm just thinking this way for the fact that she had this relationship. Her mother had a relationship with him. He had come down and stayed on Hart Street. It's a very important street with lots of important people in the abolitionist movement. Anyway, he was there at the right time. That he could have been her father. So I kind of just
Interesting.
went with that. Even to the end of her life, they had he had letters with her. So anyway, so that was something I thought was interesting and put in the
Yeah,
novel.
absolutely.
And I do have at the back, and I think this is really important. I have my author's notes where I explain, what the facts were, what I changed, why I included certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to do that, but what mainly I wanted just to show her character
Mm-hmm.
and to show what it took to be at the top pinnacle of women at that
Mm-hmm.
time. It took a lot, and in the end, it took it out of her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she really was an amazing person, and we wouldn't be here today because of some of the things that she's fought for. So absolutely, you picked a really good one.
Okay, well, that's my first woman. The second woman is even more interesting and very timely. I didn't plan it that way when I selected the woman, but it's turned out to be an extremely timely book. I think everybody who pays attention to the news might have heard the Supreme Court talking about the Comstock laws.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, this is the story of a woman who stood up to Anthony Comstock back in the day when he was in power. He got himself, Anthony Comstock got himself appointed. Okay, that's the word I'm looking for. He wasn't elected. He was appointed to be postal inspector for obscenity for the federal post office system. And I'm just going to tell you the way he did this, and this is documented. He went and bought up a whole bunch of pornographic things and pictures and books and so on. Went down to Congress and went to every congressman's office and dumped the stuff on their desk and said, "This is being sent through the mail, and it's going to hurt our children." Okay, and that's how he got appointed. Okay, and then he was in charge of deciding what was obscene and not obscene, what could be sent through the mail and what could be. Okay, and he had a whole crew of inspectors everywhere who would check the mails. Well, Ida Craddock, okay, was also from Philadelphia. I lived in Philadelphia, so I picked two Philadelphians. Benny Ream is not from Philadelphia. Anyway, she's from Philadelphia. She was raised very strictly, very isolated. Her mother taught her. She finally got to go to kind of a finishing college when she was like 16 or 17. But she was an avid reader. She read and read and read. And she originally intended to be a doctor. That's what she wanted. But her mother wouldn't let her, wouldn't pay for it. So instead, she decided to apply to the University of Pennsylvania to be the first woman to attend the University of Pennsylvania. And she took all the exams. She was fluent in Greek and Latin and French and German. I mean, she was obviously an extremely gifted woman, even though she was very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And she took all these test, and she passed at the top. So the department, this they had just started the College of Liberal Arts, and the department approved her because what could they say? She got the highest
Right.
scores. All right. And it went up to the board, and one person on the board refused to admit her. And what he said was, our facilities aren't suitable for a woman, even though she wasn't going to board there. She lived a few blocks away. She
Yeah.
was going to
Right.
walk, you know, kind of thing, or take the streetcar.
Right. Right.
So this kind of got her, she was lost. She didn't know what to do. And at the same time, her mother was giving her a lot of trouble. So she taught herself stenography, and she got herself a job at Girard College, which at the time was for boy orphans, teaching them stenography because they thought this would be a great skill for court clerks. And of course, they were all men.
Mm-hmm.
So she taught the men, and she came up with some unique ways of teaching stenography. She wrote 3 stenography textbooks along the way. But at the same time, she was trying to find a way to earn enough money to live on, because that really, she was boarding there. She really didn't have a lot of money. She kept trying to come up with a way to earn money. And at the same time, she also wanted to pursue her interest in medicine. And she met a lady named Stockham, who had written a book on pregnancy for women. And in talking to her, and by the way, I should mention that Ida Craddock kept extensive notes, and she typed them, and they're all available from the University of Indiana, Southern Indiana, and they're in the library there. So all her records are available. So I know a lot. I really felt like I lived in her head because there were hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes about her life and what she felt and so on. So everything in this book is true. Everything in this book happened. I didn't make anything up. At the front of the book, I have a list of all the characters, every one of whom is a real person, and I explain who they are. So this book is a kind of a biography, but it's a biography with the emotions, and it's told in first person, so you really do feel you're inside her head. And by the way, there's a wonderful audiobook. I have a wonderful narrator, and when you hear this audiobook, you feel like you are you are her. I mean, you just feel it. She did an amazing job. So both books are out in audiobook, and both are by Linda Kutzer, and she's a wonderful narrator.
Yeah, everybody seemed to love her, especially with that Dickinson girl.
So anyway, she decided she was upset because her mother never told her about what happens during marriage, and she had friends who had bad experiences, because basically they'd say your husband will teach you, but that's assuming that your husband knows what to do, right? So she decided that she would write marriage information. I forgot. She was talking with Stockard, and she asked Stockard, "Why wasn't that in your book?" And Stockard said, "Because I don't want Anthony Comstock to ban my book. The women need this information too badly for me to put that in, and then he'll have him ban the book, and I can't sell my book." And it was a very, very popular book at the time, because women needed to know that information, and she was a medical doctor. So anyway, so Anna said, "Well, I'm sorry." Ida said, "Then I'll write it, okay, for the young girls, so they know what's going to happen when they get married." So she wrote these pamphlets, and she started by having an office and giving them out, but people started to say, "Can't you mail them to me?" Okay, and so she knew they were, that Comstock didn't like them, but she took a chance and hoped that he didn't open the envelopes. Okay, and she did it for a while and did very well. And then I think her mother got in the way. Her mother was very upset with her that she was doing this. It was totally against being a lady. And I should point out that her mother ran a drug company and sold all kinds kinds of drugs and herbals and so on. So she was not a typical woman either. But they had money. They did have money. So she always was trying to entice Ida back with money. So I think she actually told on her. And so she was brought up to court for sending these through the mail. And her friends, she joined the Unitarian Church, and she had a really good, strong group of friends. And they got the first woman lawyer in Philadelphia to represent her. So it was kind of a cool thing. And she got off, and they told her, leave, get away from your mother, get away. So she went to Chicago. And then she went out to California. So it was a lot to write about because, she traveled the country and she wrote all about these places that she went. And when she was in California, she got a job as a copyist for a man who was going to Alaska to write a book about Alaska. So she got to go on one of the first steamships up to see the glaciers and the native tribes up there. And she did all the copy editing, because back then you have to remember, she had a typewriter, but not everybody typed. So he would dictate and she would type. So I actually think she probably had a lot to do with writing his book. And you can still get his book on Google.
It's amazing what how they teach themselves, or their parents would teach them, all the different languages and whatnot. And now nowadays, we're losing that. We're not as educated, I don't think, from our parents and the languages and whatnot. The internet is great, but that one-on-one teaching experience makes a whole big difference,
It does. But I learned a lot in high school. I took Latin. I don't think they still give it, but I did take it at the time, and I took Spanish.
Yes. Yeah, well, you kind of have to know Spanish now. Yep, before you know it.
My family is Spanish heritage.
So is my husband.
Yeah, my grandfather was an illegal immigrant. Way back. And he had a farm raising tomatoes for Campbell's soup.
Wow.
In Delaware. And he had 13 children.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, where did he immigrate from?
Well, he was on a ship during the Spanish-American War, and he was the engineer. It was the engineer on the ship, and he jumped ship in Cuba, and then worked his way up to north and fell in love with a girl from Canarsie.
So then maybe he was from Spain and then took the ship to Cuba?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Same thing. Yep. Same thing with my husband's grandparents. Same exact thing. They all went to Cuba.
But then later he must have discovered that if you put Puerto Rico on the birth certificate, that made you a citizen or something, because all his later children, it says Puerto Rico on the birth certificates.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It's amazing what you could find out, right? Just amazing.
Yeah. Family history is interesting too. Maybe I'll write about mine someday.
That would be very interesting. It's so much fun.
Yeah, haven't done that yet. Anyway, so Ida wrote lots of articles for like Atlantic Monthly, but she didn't publish them under her own name. But she published them under her middle name, which was Selinari. I don't know how you pronounce it. Selinari, I think. And so you can track down. She wrote about she did studies of folk tales. She wrote something about the totem poles that she saw. So she wrote very interesting pieces, kind of anthropological. Mm-hmm. So she had lots of interests. But meanwhile, she's being chased all over the country. And she even goes to England to try to get away from Comstock and getting put in jail. Finally, though, she says, I can't keep running. So she comes back and actually goes to New York and entices him to arrest her there. And she decides that she's going to fight him on the First Amendment. So he brought a case against her for sending obscenity through the mail, and she took the case as her First Amendment right to send what she wanted through the mail. I mean, you have to understand, this is through the mail in envelopes. It's not like open,
Right.
Stuff
Like
going through the
anyone could
mail.
open it. It was sealed.
No, no, it's sealed stuff in envelopes, but they were opening the mail,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Which, who knows? Anyway, so so he collected all her stuff and burnt it. That's
Mm-hmm.
pure censorship. And she had doctors who said this is, medical information. It's not obscenity in any sense of the form. The thing was, she insisted on using the proper medical terms for things. And so, of course, in the Victorian period, that was not considered appropriate for a young lady, for certainly. So anyway, Comstock had it set up so that the jury never got to see the materials because it was obscene. You couldn't show obscene materials in court, right? So he just had to stand up and say it was obscene.
Mm-hmm.
So the jury had to decide it was obscene. So she was put into the prison in New York City on the island.
Oh, Alcatraz?
No, the one in New York City on the island in New York City. Yeah.
Why can't I think of it?
And I know it very well. Let's see. Well, anyway, she was put into prison, and she discovered that she couldn't stand it. I mean, they were giving the water treatments, they had forced labor, but the thing that really got her was they were giving smallpox vaccinations, and they would give it over and over and over to the same people as more as punishment than anything else. And so she fought that as well. So she had a really miserable time, and she realized that she really couldn't handle prison very well. Now that was for the state. Then she was taken before federal court for the same offense. In other words, Comstock took her to the state court first, and then he took her to the federal court. The federal court just had the 3 judges. Same process. They weren't allowed to see anything. And of course, she was condemned to 5 years in prison. So I'm not going to tell the end of the story, but she did get back at him. And she was one of the first to start to bring him down. And she actually, what she ended up doing was cut back a lot of the funding he was getting from churches. So that was really interesting. So in a way, she did fight back, and she did have her success.
Mm-hmm.
But I should add one little interesting fact about her.
Yeah.
She never married, okay? But she was a marriage counselor, and she wrote about marriage. Okay, so she came up with the idea, and I'm not sure this is true or not, but having read her papers, I think in her mind it was true. She said she had an angel lover.
I gotcha.
And she wrote all about her angel lover and what he taught her. So that's where she said she got all her information from. I actually think she read a lot of medical textbooks too along the way. But anyway, so it makes for a really interesting story. She's still honored by some spiritualist groups because of her spiritualism and her writings on that. She wrote some really interesting pieces. She felt because she was denied the right to get her doctorate, she when she wasn't allowed to go to college, that she would write her own doctorate, and she wrote it on the woman as goddess. So she did she did finish it. That was one of her goals. And then she sent it to her friend in England so that Comstock couldn't destroy it with all her other writings. Okay, so that's Idocratic, and if you're interested in finding out more about her angel,
yeah, I love
that's Comstock.
Now I
and
know where you got the title from.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what she was. She was censored Her materials were definitely not allowed anywhere in public. They were burned, and she was then pursued and chased as well and put in prison. So anyway,
Unbelievable.
so that's our Anthony Comstock, and I do bring in some of the things. He did some pretty terrible things. He was not a nice man.
No, not at all.
Mm-mm,
Not at all.
not at all. And that fact that his laws are still on the books is because the Supreme Court a while back had said that obscenity, it can't be defined. That's that was over the play. I remember that was over play. What was it? Playmate. Yeah, when that was brought up, and they so it's very hard. So what is obscene? Is explaining to women, the Marriage Act obscene? I don't know.
Hmm. No,
It was
I understand. I get it.
yeah. Okay.
Unbelievable.
So
Unbelievable.
those are my two very interesting women, and as I said, almost all firsthand. And you can go look up the Ida Craddock's materials are all typed. There are several books that have reprinted some of her writings as well that are out there. And Anna Dickinson's papers are in the Library of Congress.
Yeah,
And
unbelievable how it's so great that you're still able to go back.
and the interesting thing was she was her sister. Her sister thought she was insane when she was in her 50s and had her put into an asylum in Pennsylvania, Dansville. And she was in the Dansville asylum, and a doctor came to examine her, and she convinced him that she was not insane. And he took her home, and she spent the rest of her life living with him and his wife in New York. In New York. So when she died, a judge decided that her papers should be sent to the Library of Congress, and that's how they got there. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know anything about her,
Yeah.
because as I said, she was written out of women's history, even though
Mhm.
she spoke on women's rights everywhere and gave a lot of money to Susan B.
Mhm.
Anthony as well.
Absolutely. No, I love both of the books, and how the protagonists are just such incredible women, and we can't wait for the next book to come out, which was called Prairie Cinderella,
Prairie
right?
Cinderella. That's
Yeah.
right.
So I can't wait. I can't wait to see the title. I mean, the book cover. I'm sure it's going to be really
Uh,
nice because all your book covers are
yeah,
beautiful.
I'm going to try to get her picture on the cover if I can. Everybody knows her picture because it's actually on phone cases. You can buy phone cases that have her picture on it. She looks like a gypsy in the picture, but she's not. She was actually dressed as an Italian peasant in the pictures, but I think people buy it thinking it's like a gypsy, pretty gypsy on it. But she's not.
I could see it probably with a headscarf or something, right? I
Yes,
haven't
well,
seen the picture, but I could just picture it in my mind.
yeah, and she had a black bodice and a white black. But it was actually Italian. She when she was in Rome, she dressed in Italian peasant wear.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
none of these women were everyday. They were all they all were a little bit on the edge of whatever they were, and they weren't following the trends of the time at
Hmm.
all.
Right. They were in their own lane.
They had their own way of dressing and their own way of doing their hair and their own way of interacting with people, most of them with men. I mean, all of them. I mean, if you look through the characters in this book, they're almost all men. She had a lot of interrelationships with men and less with women. Um, and maybe that's because powerful women, you know, don't don't gather a lot of women around them, and that could be a problem
Hmm.
in some ways. Maybe,
Hmm. Agreed. Now, where can people reach you if they wanted to check your website out?
Well, it's easy because it's joankoster.com.
Very good.
Yeah. So easy to find. And every month I do a write-up of another forgotten woman. So there's an article about them. So a lot of the women who do appear in my books are also written up on that. There's an article. I have a newsletter that always has a interesting historical tidbit. For example, this past one, I don't know if you know this, but the woman who founded Mother's Day did it in honor of her mother, who her mother had organized Women's Day, Mother's Days, where women come together to make food packages and clothing for women who needed, had lots of children and needed help. Because back then there was no birth control. They had lots of children and people, they really did need help. And her daughter thought this was so wonderful. She wanted to honor her. And she fought and got the petition, got it through, accepted and made an official holiday. And then the card companies and the florists began selling all this Mother's Day stuff and made it a commercial thing. And she was outraged. It was not supposed to be commercial. It
Right.
was supposed to be to honor mothers. So she started to take petitions against it, have it withdrawn. She picketed the White House. She picketed florists, big card factories. And her family thought she was insane, and they had her put in an insane asylum. And she died in an insane asylum. It was real easy to put women in insane asylums.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you told us that story. I didn't really know how Mother's Day came about.
Right. Well, up until the point where she got it approved, it was normal. But that's the aftermath.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the part of the story you never hear.
No, you don't. That's why you're here, Joan. You're here to tell us all the stuff.
Okay.
All the behind the scenes stuff. You find out the truth.
So if you go, you'll find out all these the fastest woman in the world, Dolores Elliott. She used to race with a dog in her lap. Because the cars going 30 was considered they thought that women would be destroyed because they were going 30 miles an hour.
That is so funny. Well,
Anyway,
thank you so much for coming on, Joan. I really appreciate it. And I'll say the books one more time: That Dickinson Girl and Censored Angel, both by Joan Koster. You can reach her at joankoster.com. Sign up for her newsletter to get all those fun little tidbits that you never really even knew about. I love that. I think everybody should sign up for your newsletter and learn a little bit.
Right.
And
Only
the books are up. Sorry, what was that?
It only comes once a month, so it's not like you're going to fill up your email or anything.
Right, you're not going to inundate them. It's only once a month, and it's something good that they probably would want to know about.
I always have a recipe too.
Oh, okay, very good.
From the
Okay.
1800s. The last one was from 1840, and it was how to make ketchup, and it didn't have any tomatoes in it. Ketchup.
How to make what? You got cut out.
Oh, how to make ketchup.
Oh, ketchup. Oh, isn't that interesting? Okay,
And
we'll have to take a look at that.
Didn't have any tomatoes. It was made with anchovies.
See, if anyone wants to go on, just that recipe alone would be interesting enough to get someone to go on to find out about that. That is so funny. That is so funny. Well, thank you so much, Joan, for coming on. I appreciate it. We were able to connect and get it done. Yes, and I'm definitely going to have you on again another time.
Yes, but I do Prairie Cinderella.
Sounds perfect, Joan. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you for having me. It's been great. Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.